Hello everyone, welcome back to the Wildwood Sim Farms YouTube channel. My name is Grayson, and before we get into today's video, I would greatly appreciate if you would go ahead and click that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Without further ado, let's go on and get right into the video. One of the biggest threats to honeybee survival in the southeast isn't extreme cold, and it's not extreme heat either. It's the constant back and forth, warm days followed by cold nights, sudden cold snaps after mild stretches, and winters that never quite settle into one pattern. Here in southeast Alabama and across much of the southern US, our winters are unpredictable, and that unpredictability puts unique pressure on honeybee colonies. Bees are incredibly resilient when conditions are stable, even when those conditions are cold. What they struggle with is instability. Today, I want to break down what temperature swings actually do inside a hive, why they cause so many winter losses in this region, and how you as a beekeeper can manage your colonies in a way that works with our climate instead of fighting it. Bees are built to survive cold weather, so when temperatures drop, the colony responds by forming a winter cluster around the queen, tightening together and generating heat by vibrating their flight muscles. As long as that cluster stays intact and the bees have access to food, they can survive long stretches of cold far better than many people realize. The key word there is consistent. When temperatures remain cold, the colony settles into a rhythm. Energy use stabilizes, the cluster slowly migrates upward through stored honey, and everything inside the hive becomes predictable. But the problem starts when temperatures refuse to stay put. Temperature swings force the colony to constantly shift gears. On warm days, the cluster loosens. The bees begin moving around the hive more freely. But on cold nights, that same cluster has to tighten back up again, sometimes rapidly and sometimes repeatedly over several days. Each time the cluster breaks and reforms, energy is lost. Each time bees have to move back into a tight formation, more honey is burned. So over time, those repeated adjustments add up to a serious strain on food reserves. This is why colonies in places like southeast Alabama and other places in the southern US often consume more honey during a mild winter with temperature swings than they do during a colder, more stable one. Warm winter days feel encouraging to beekeepers, but for bees, they can create long-term problems. When temperatures rise into the 60s or 70s, bees become active. They start flying, cleaning cells, and in many cases, they start raising brood earlier than they normally would. Once brood is present, everything changes. A brood-rearing colony has much higher temperature requirements. So therefore, the cluster can no longer relax into simple survival mode. It now has to maintain brood nest temperatures, which dramatically increase energy use. If temperatures then crash, and in our region they almost always do, the colony is suddenly locked into a high energy state with no room for error. This is one of the most common paths to winter losses in the southeast. One of the most confusing winter losses for beekeepers is opening a dead hive and finding honey still present. This usually isn't because the colony didn't have enough food, it's because temperature swings prevented the bees from accessing the food they had. When it's cold, the cluster becomes very reluctant to break formation. If honey isn't positioned directly above the cluster, the bees may not be able to reach it without exposing themselves to lethal cold. Warm spells encourage movement, and cold snaps lock the cluster back into place. If food placement doesn't align with where the cluster ends up during those cold periods, the colony can starve with frames of honey just inches away. Stronger colonies have a big advantage when dealing with temperature swings. They have larger clusters, better insulation created by sheer bee mass, and more flexibility in how they move within the hive. Weak colonies don't have that margin. Smaller clusters lose heat faster and burn through energy more quickly. They also have fewer bees to rotate through colder positions, which means stress builds faster and recovery takes longer after each temperature shift. In the southeast, a colony that might survive a stable northern winter often collapses simply because it can't keep up with repeated swings in activity and energy demand. Reducing space is one of the most important steps going into winter. Colonies should be housed in a space they can realistically manage. Extra empty boxes don't help the bees stay warm. They make it harder. A hive that's too large forces the cluster to heat unnecessary space and makes it more difficult to maintain stable conditions during temperature swings. If a colony cannot fully occupy a box, it's better off in a smaller footprint where heat, food, and bees stay close together. In climates like ours, it's not enough to simply say a hive has plenty of honey. Bees need access to that food when temperatures drop suddenly. That means food should be positioned above the cluster whenever possible. Top place resources like sugar bricks, fondant, or even candy boards remain accessible even during cold snaps when bees can't move laterally across frames. This single change prevents a huge percentage of winter starvation losses in the southeast. Warm spells can tempt beekeepers to feed aggressively in winter, but this needs to be done carefully. Feeding can stimulate brood rearing, which increases energy demands dramatically. For strong colonies, this may be manageable, but for weaker ones, it often accelerates collapse instead of preventing it. Before encouraging brood, ask yourself whether the colony has the population, food reserves, and stability to support it through the next inevitable cold snap. Temperature swings increase condensation risk inside the hive. Warm air rises, meets cold surfaces, and turns into moisture. If that moisture drips back onto the cluster, it can chill bees even when temperatures aren't extreme. Upper ventilation allows moist air to escape while still keeping drafts under control. This isn't about making the hive cold, it's about keeping it dry and stable. A lot of winter beekeeping advice is written for climates with long, predictable winters. That advice doesn't always translate well to places like South Alabama. Here, success comes from creating stability inside the hive when the weather refuses to provide it outside. Stable space, stable access to food, and stable internal conditions. The goal isn't to eliminate temperature swings, because that's impossible, but the goal is to reduce how much work those swings force your bees to do. Warm days don't mean it's time to inspect. Every time a hive is open, stored heat is lost and internal conditions are disrupted. One warm afternoon also doesn't mean winter is over. In the southeast, winter almost always comes back. And flight activity on a warm day doesn't necessarily indicate a healthy colony. It just means bees are responding to temperature. Cold rarely kills bees by itself. Heat rarely does either. In climates like ours, it's the constant shift between the two that causes trouble. If you can manage space, prioritize food, placement, resist early stimulation, and focus on stability instead of reaction, you give your bees a much better chance of surviving unpredictable winters. Beekeeping in the South isn't about fighting the weather, it's about understanding it and adjusting your management to match. Thank y'all so much for watching the video. I greatly appreciate it. Hope you learned something new out of it. We deal with this stuff all the time. Me as a beekeeper, that's really the one thing I dread about winter is these constant up and down temperatures. Honestly, I'd much rather it just stay cold all winter long, but we really don't get that, so you just kind of have to deal with it. So even though if you're a northern beekeeper, you may think you have it rough. You may think that it's tough, when it's cold, and I'm sure it is, because, we don't have as harsh winters. We don't have, like, those highs where it only gets up to 30 or 28, nothing like that. But if when you get up to those northern states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, some others to name, it's just a little bit more colder, and it stays colder for longer periods, which, for me, I would rather have, because you don't have all these up and down temperatures potentially killing your bees. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you found something interesting in it or learned something. If you will, smash that like on your way out, because liking this video really pushes the video out to more people. The YouTube algorithm loves it, so if you do that, that's really what helps my channel grow. And also, by the way, I plan to do a giveaway once I reach 3,000 subscribers. All you have to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel to be eligible to win. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a blessed day.